the billionaire. Called my shop a junkyard until I found the letter his father hid inside. The V8 engine. The truck arrived like a mistake. Not the kind of mistake you correct with an apology. More like the kind that makes the whole town pause mid-breath and ask, "Who in the world is that for?" It came up the two-lane mountain road with a shine that didn't belong here. A massive silver transport rig, polished like a mirror, humming with the quiet confidence of expensive machinery. Its tires threw gravel like insults. Its engine didn't roar so much as scream. High, controlled, mechanical, echoing off the hills and rolling through the pine trees until even the birds went still. Elias Mercer didn't move. He sat on the old wooden stool by the open bay door of Mercer Auto, pipe in his mouth, cap pulled low, boots planted in the dust like he'd been nailed there by years. His shop was a little crooked, a little loud, a little honest. Tin roof. Peeling paint. Tools hung on pegboards the way they'd been hung since the 70s. The floor wore a permanent skin of oil and grit. A hand-painted sign above the entrance had lost half its letters, so it read more like a warning than a business. Most days, the loudest thing in Elias's world was a stubborn starter or a dog barking down the road. Today, the loudest thing in town had just parked in his gravel lot. The passenger door opened first. A man stepped down like he expected the ground to give him a receipt. He was young, early 30s, tall, tailored, clean, in the way only money could make someone clean. His suit was charcoal and sharp, and it fit him like control. His watch caught the afternoon sun and flashed it back like a little threat. He checked it before his shoes even hit the gravel. Then he looked down at the dust gathering on the leather and frowned like the dirt had crossed a line. He didn't look at the trees. He didn't look at the hills or the quiet. He didn't look at the hawk circling above the ridge, wide and patient. He looked at Elias's garage. Then he looked at Elias. "This is it?" he asked. His voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "I was told I was looking for a master. This looks like a junkyard with a roof." Elias took the pipe out of his mouth slowly and set it on the stool beside him. He didn't stand yet. Didn't rush. Didn't scramble to prove anything. He watched the hawk for another second, like he had all the time in the world. "The junkyard keeps folks alive around here," Elias said calmly. "Rust is just a skin. It's what's underneath that matters." The man's mouth twitched into a thin smile, like he didn't know whether to be amused or offended. He snapped his fingers at the driver. The rear hydraulics hissed, and a ramp began to lower, slow and smooth, like the truck was unveiling a secret. A car emerged, not just any car, a 1967 Jaguar E-Type, British racing green, polished until it looked wet. Chrome shining. Curves, like a promise. The kind of car people put on posters and call art, because they don't know what else to do with beauty that moves. It rolled down the ramp and onto the gravel. Then it sat there. Silent. Dead quiet, like a statue. The young man walked toward it and ran his hand across the hood, the way a man touches something he owns. Not like love, but like proof. "I'm Julian Harlow," he said, like the name should unlock doors. "I've been to 5 shops, the best in the country. Engineers, computers, German parts. They replaced the fuel pump, the plugs, the entire wiring harness. Nothing. It won't even kick. They told me the engine is a static mystery, a total loss." Elias finally stood up. His knees popped, loud in the air. He moved with the slow confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime letting others rush while he stayed steady. He didn't open the hood. He walked around the Jaguar once. Just once. His fingers trailed lightly along the fender, not leaving a mark. He leaned close to the driver's door and inhaled, like he was reading a scent the way a hunter reads wind. Julian watched, impatient, tapping his phone against his palm. "They couldn't figure it out," Julian snapped. "I have a gala in 3 days. This car was my father's legacy. It needs to be there." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook like a weapon. "I'll write you $50,000 right now just to make it roar." Elias glanced at the checkbook, then at Julian's face, then briefly at Julian's hands. The fingers. The twitch. The way they couldn't be still. Elias wiped his hands on a greasy rag and said, "Keep your money." Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" I don't fix cars for people who treat them like trophies, Elias said. Julian's smile vanished. His voice tightened. Do you have any idea who I am? Elias's eyes stayed calm. You're a man in a hurry. Julian scoffed. I run a global firm. I don't have time for small-town philosophy. And I don't have time for men who think they can buy a heartbeat, Elias replied. He leaned against the Jaguar's door like he belonged there. I don't fix cars for people who don't know how to drive them. Julian's jaw clenched. He looked like he was about to turn around, climb back into his shiny world, and leave this dusty insult behind. Then he looked at the Jaguar again. And for a split second, the arrogance slipped. Because that car wasn't just a car. It was the last thing his father had loved that Julian hadn't been able to replace. Elias nodded toward the stool by the garage door. Sit. Julian stared. What? Sit. Put that phone away and tell me why a silent car scares you so much. Julian laughed once, sharp, defensive. This is ridiculous. Elias didn't argue. He just waited. Silence does that. It doesn't fight you. It waits until you run out of places to hide. Julian's hand hovered over his pocket like the phone was an oxygen tank. Then he exhaled, hard, like the suit was choking him. He walked to the stool and sat down. Not gracefully. Like a man surrendering a habit he didn't know how to live without. He shoved the phone into his pocket and stared at the gravel. Elias went inside the garage and returned with a wrench and an old coffee mug with faded lettering. He set the mug on the bench like it mattered. Then he leaned on the wrench, still not touching the car. Talk, Elias said. Julian swallowed. His voice came quieter than he meant it to. It's not the car, he admitted. It's my father. Elias didn't nod or soften. He just watched. Julian's fingers folded and unfolded. He was hard, Julian said. Not mean, just solid. The kind of man who could look at you and make you feel like you were still 12. Elias's gaze flicked up just a little. Recognition lived there. Julian kept staring at the ground. When I got my first big bonus, I bought the Jaguar, not because I loved it, because he loved it. I thought if I gave him something perfect, he'd stop looking at me like I was a stranger. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and stopped, like it remembered it was supposed to be quiet too. But he didn't want perfect, Julian said, voice tightening. He wanted me to be honest. Elias's face didn't change, but his voice lowered. And were you? Julian flinched. Anger tried to rise, his usual shield, but it couldn't find air. I run a firm, Julian said. We fix problems, quietly. The kind of problems that come with powerful people. We protect them from consequences. Elias let out a small, dry sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You've been protecting folks from consequences so long, you forgot they're supposed to teach you something. Julian's throat tightened. My father hated what I became. He used to say I had expensive hands. Elias nodded once. Hands that sign papers, instead of turning bolts. Julian's eyes shone, sudden and hot. He died angry at me. Elias looked at him steadily. How'd he die? Julian's mouth opened, then closed. He hesitated too long. Elias waited anyway. Heart attack, Julian said. Elias's eyes narrowed. That's the medical word. What's the human word? Julian's shoulders sagged. After an argument. The truth landed in the air like something heavy. Julian spoke fast, like speed could soften it. The night before he died, he called me. He said he'd found something dangerous. He said he wanted to do the right thing. And I told him he didn't understand the world. I told him if he pulled that thread, it would strangle him. Julian swallowed hard. He said, Son, you've been living like a man who thinks consequences are for other people. His voice broke on the last word. Elias set the wrench down gently. And then he hung up, Julian whispered. He died the next day. Elias didn't pity him. He didn't comfort him. He simply asked the question that mattered. So what are you really here for, Julian? The gala or forgiveness? Julian's breath hitched. Elias held up a hand. Don't answer with your head. Answer with your gut. Julian stared at the Jaguar. That green paint, that perfect shine, that dead silence. He whispered, I want to hear him again. Elias's expression softened, just a fraction. The kind of soft that comes from weathered understanding, not sentiment. "All right," Elias said, "then let's listen." He moved around the Jaguar again, slower this time. He pressed his palm to the leather seat, like he was checking temperature. He leaned close to the tailpipe and inhaled. He stepped back and watched the car the way a man watches a horse, looking for tension, for fear, for the smallest hint of a lie. Julian's impatience started to return. "You're not even opening the hood," he snapped. Elias didn't look at him. "Cars talk. Most people are too loud to hear 'em." Julian muttered something under his breath. Elias reached toward the ignition, and his fingers paused. A tiny scratch. Not from age, not from keys. Too clean. Too intentional. He ran his thumb over it, then glanced at Julian's watch, at his tapping foot, at the way Julian kept leaning forward like the air itself was wasting his time. Elias said quietly, "This car isn't just broken." Julian blinked. "What?" "It's locked," Elias said, "on purpose." Julian's jaw tightened. "That's impossible." Elias finally looked at him. "City shops throw computers at a problem. I watched the problem's behavior. Different game." Elias opened the hood then, and the engine bay gleamed, too clean, too perfect, like somebody scrubbed it to hide fingerprints, not to keep it healthy. Elias reached into the darkness under the dash. His fingers moved with a calm certainty. Then he tugged. A small device clicked free, wired into the ignition circuit. Julian stared. "What is that?" "A kill switch," Elias said. "Not factory, and it's not a simple on and off. This one's picky." Julian's voice sharpened. "Are you telling me someone sabotaged my father's car?" Elias held the device between two fingers like it was a dead insect. "I'm telling you your father put it there." Julian froze. "Why would he?" Elias nodded toward Julian's chest. "Because he knew you'd show up like this. In a hurry, trying to force a ghost to perform for an audience." Julian stood, furious and confused. "That's insane." Elias wiped his hands and pointed to the tool bench. "You want the car to start. You're gonna stay. You're gonna help. And you're gonna listen to the story you've been avoiding." Julian's laugh was bitter. "I didn't drive here to play mechanic." Elias's eyes hardened. "No, you drove here because you couldn't buy what you needed in the city." That shut Julian up. Elias handed him a pair of gloves. Cheap, worn, real. "Hold the light." Julian stared at the gloves like they were an insult. Then he took them. And in that small moment, gloves over expensive hands, something in the air shifted. Elias worked slowly, intentionally, explaining nothing at first. He loosened bolts, checked lines, listened for the tiny clicks of metal that told him where tension lived. Julian held the light and watched, his impatience slowly turning into fascination. Elias broke the silence while his hands moved. "Your father used to come here when you were little," Elias said. Julian looked up sharply. "No, he didn't." Elias didn't stop working. "He did." Julian frowned. "Why didn't I know?" "Because he didn't bring you," Elias said. "Not at first. He wanted a place where nobody cared about his money." Julian's throat tightened. "You knew him." Elias's jaw worked like he was chewing on an old memory. "Yeah, I knew him." Julian leaned closer. "Who were you to him?" Elias finally stopped and looked at Julian fully. "I was his friend," Elias said, "and once I was his partner." Julian's face went blank. "Partner?" Elias returned to the engine. 40 years ago, your dad wasn't an empire. He was a brilliant engineer with grease on his knuckles and an idea in his head. He built prototypes in a little club up on Hollow Ridge. It wasn't fancy. It was a place for people who loved machines because machines didn't lie. Julian's voice came out thin. "My father said he built everything alone." Elias snorted. "Men like to edit their origins when they get rich." Julian swallowed. "So what happened?" Elias's hands kept moving, but his voice grew heavier. "Something happened that made him leave me behind, something he thought he had to do to protect you." Julian's breath caught. "Protect me from what?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded toward the intake manifold. The part of the engine most people didn't want to touch because it was work and it was risk. "Hand me that socket," Elias said. Julian fumbled, then passed it over. Elias loosened the bolts one by one, steady as a prayer. City shops told you the engine was totaled, Elias said. That's because they were scared to go inside it. They didn't want to open the part that might tell them they were wrong. He lifted the manifold carefully. Julian held his breath. Inside, tucked into a heat-proof casing, was something that didn't belong there. A small envelope. A vintage brass key taped beside it. Julian's eyes widened. What? Elias removed the casing gently, like he was lifting a heart out of a chest. He handed it to Julian. Julian's hands shook. He peeled the tape away and stared at the letter. The paper was aged but intact, protected by the casing, the way a man protects a confession. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. Julian's throat went tight. He hid this inside the engine? Elias nodded. He hid it where only a real mechanic would find it. Julian's voice cracked. Why? Elias's eyes were tired. Because he knew you'd go everywhere else first. And he knew you'd come to me last. Julian opened the letter with trembling fingers. The first line hit him like a punch, Elias. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say it to your face. Julian's breath stuttered. He read on, slowly. I built an empire so my son would never be poor. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach him how to be rich in spirit. I taught him how to win, and I forgot to teach him how to live. Julian swallowed hard, eyes blurring. Elias didn't watch the words. He watched Julian. Because the words weren't the point. The effect was. The letter continued, Julian will come to you angry. He will come to you rushing. He will come to you thinking money can fix what time broke. Don't take his money. Make him stay. Make him listen. Make him learn the sound of something real. Julian's lower lip trembled. Then the line that cracked him open, Elias is the only man I know who can teach my son the difference between a trophy and a legacy. Julian's chest tightened like a hand had closed around it. The last paragraph was smaller, more personal. I'm sorry for the betrayal. I thought I was saving my family. I thought I was doing what a father does. But I left my brother in the fire, and I can't carry that shame anymore. If I'm gone and you still have it in you, please forgive me. And please, for Julian's sake, don't let him become the kind of man who never hears his own heart. Julian stared at the letter until the words stopped being words and became something heavier. He looked up at Elias. Elias's eyes were wet, but he didn't let the tears fall. Why didn't he tell me? Julian whispered. Elias's voice came rough. Because pride is a stubborn engine too. Julian's fingers curled around the vintage key. What is this for? Elias exhaled slowly. For the thing he never wanted you to inherit. Julian frowned. What thing? Elias nodded toward the kill switch device on the bench. That. Julian stared. You said he installed it. He did, Elias said, but not to punish you, to wake you up. Julian's face tightened. How? Elias took the device and pointed to a tiny lever no bigger than a fingernail. This switch triggers when the ignition senses a rush, Elias said. Hard turn, fast crank, impatient pressure. It's like the car can feel your hands. It's a metaphor built into metal. Julian stared, disbelief and anger fighting in his eyes. A metaphor? Elias met his gaze. Your father loved you. He just didn't know how to reach you without building the lesson into something you'd actually respect. Julian looked down at his hands. Expensive hands. Hands that had signed contracts and ended careers without ever seeing the faces attached. He whispered, so the car wouldn't start because you were forcing it, Elias said. Because you were trying to make it perform instead of letting it breathe. Julian's eyes burned. I didn't know. Elias's tone softened. That's the point. You didn't know you were rushing through everything. A beat. Elias nodded toward the engine. You want to hear it roar? You're going to finish this. Julian swallowed. How? Elias handed him the wrench. Julian looked at it like it weighed 100 pounds. Elias pointed to one last bolt that needed tightening to secure the manifold back into place. Turn it, Elias said. Slow, steady, like you mean to stay. Julian's hands trembled. He set the wrench on the bolt. He tightened, careful, measured. The metal gave a small, satisfying resistance, then held. Elias nodded. Good. Julian stepped back, breathing hard, like he'd just done something bigger than tightening a bolt. Elias leaned close to the engine bay and listened for a moment, ears and instinct, old-school truth. Then he looked at Julian. "Now," Elias said, "you start it." Julian slid into the driver's seat. The leather smelled like thyme. The dash was simple. No screens, no prompts, no notifications. Just dials. Metal. Honesty. He placed the key into the ignition. His hand hovered, and he felt his own heartbeat in his throat. Elias's voice came through the open door, calm as a lake. "Don't force it," he said. "Just be here." Julian closed his eyes. He thought of his father's voice, of the word legacy, of the way he'd spent his whole life trying to replace his father instead of remembering him. He breathed in, then out. He turned the key, gently. The engine coughed once, twice, and then it caught. A deep, throaty roar filled the garage, alive, undeniable, like the car had been holding its breath for years and finally let it go. Julian froze. His eyes filled instantly. He laughed once, and it came out broken, and then his face crumpled like he'd been keeping a dam built inside him for a decade, and the sound of that engine had blown it apart. He covered his mouth with his hand, but the tears came anyway. Elias didn't mock him, didn't pat him. He just stood there, listening, letting the moment be what it was. Julian whispered through the ache, "That's him." Elias nodded once. "That's memory." Julian's shoulders shook. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of his name." Elias's voice was low. "And you forgot you were already his son." The Jaguar idled steady, like a perfectly timed heart. Elias leaned in, eyes on Julian's hands gripping the wheel. Not tight now, not desperate, just present. "You hear that?" Elias asked. Julian swallowed. "Yeah." "That's not noise," Elias said. "That's a rhythm. That's a machine telling you it's okay when you stop trying to outrun it." Julian wiped his face, embarrassed and raw at the same time. Then he looked at Elias with something different in his eyes. Not superiority, not pity, respect. Julian stepped out, letter still in his hand. He held it out like an offering. "I didn't know," he said again, softer. Elias took the letter carefully, like it was fragile. "Most sons don't," he said. Julian looked around the shop, the old tools, the rusted shelves, the oil-stained floor. "I said it was a junkyard," Julian admitted, voice tight with shame. Elias shrugged. "You weren't the first." Julian took a breath. "I can fix that." Elias waited. Julian straightened, reflexively reaching for the old posture of control. "I could buy you a new shop in the city. Brand new lifts, top equipment, everything you want. You wouldn't have to scrape by out here." Elias looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Not unkind, but certain." "A diamond doesn't need a gold box to shine, Julian," Elias said. "It just needs someone who knows how to look at it." Julian swallowed. "Then what do I do?" Elias nodded toward the stool. "You come back," Elias said, "not to buy anything, not to perform. You come back to remember what it feels like to sit still, to listen, to be taught." Julian's throat tightened. "And the gala?" Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you want to take that car to show off, go ahead. But don't call it legacy. Call it what it is." Julian looked at the Jaguar. Then he looked at the letter in his hands. He exhaled. "No," Julian said quietly. "I don't want it as a trophy." Elias nodded once, satisfied. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket, angry, insistent, demanding his attention. He didn't pull it out. Not yet. He looked up at Elias and asked the simplest question he'd asked all day. "Can I stay for coffee?" Elias's face softened in a way it hadn't earlier. He picked up the faded mug and tipped it slightly, like a toast. "Yeah," he said, "you can stay." They sat in the open bay, coffee steaming, the Jaguar ticking softly as it cooled. The sun slid behind the ridge, turning the sky the color of old bruises and fresh beginnings. And Julian, still in the wrong clothes, still with clean hair and city stress clinging to him, listened. He listened to the wind in the trees, to the distant sound of a truck on the road, to the quiet creak of the old stool beneath him. He listened to Elias tell stories about his father that weren't about money or headlines. Stories about a man who once stayed late to fix a stranger's car because the stranger had a kid in the back seat and needed to get home. Stories about a man who laughed too loud and cursed at stubborn bolts like they'd personally offended him. Stories about a man who loved machines because they made sense when people didn't. Halfway through, Elias glanced out toward the road and said, almost like he was speaking to a room full of listeners instead of one billionaire, "Have you ever held on to something that belonged to someone you lost? Tell me what it is and why it's special to you." Julian blinked at him. Elias shrugged. "Feels right to ask." Julian stared into his coffee for a moment, then said, "I held on to anger for years, like it was all I had left of him." Elias nodded. "Now you got something better." Julian's eyes lifted to the Jaguar. A roar. Elias corrected him gently. A heartbeat. Months passed. The town went back to normal, the way small towns do. The same diner, the same gas station, the same gossip, the same quiet. But every Sunday morning, a British racing green Jaguar E-Type cut up the mountain road with a sound that made people look up from their porches. Not because it was loud, because it sounded alive. Julian still wore suits during the week. He still ran his firm, still took meetings, still lived in glass buildings where the air smelled like money and stress. But something in him changed. He stopped arriving like a storm. He started arriving like a man. On Sundays, he drove up to Mercer Auto, parked in the gravel like any other customer, and walked inside without checking his watch first. He'd bring coffee beans or donuts from a bakery downstate. Sometimes he'd bring nothing but himself, and he'd sit on the stool by the bay door while Elias worked on somebody's pickup or tuned an old engine that wouldn't idle right. Julian didn't talk much at first. He listened. He listened to Elias's stories, to the engines, to the way the world sounded when you weren't trying to conquer it. Sometimes he'd get his hands dirty. Sometimes he'd just watch. Once, when Julian apologized again for calling the place a junkyard, Elias waved him off and said, "You didn't insult me, you revealed yourself." Julian nodded, swallowing a truth he couldn't avoid anymore. Because that's what the Jaguar had been the whole time. Not a broken car, a mirror. And the letter inside the V8 engine wasn't there to fix metal. It was there to fix a sun. One Sunday, Julian stood by the Jaguar, looking at the curves of it, the way the sun caught the green paint and made it glow. He said, quietly, "I used to think broken meant useless." "Most folks do." Julian's hand rested on the hood. "But sometimes broken just means waiting." Elias nodded, waiting for the right person to listen. Julian looked at him, eyes clear. "I'm listening," Julian said. Elias's smile was small but real. "Good," he said. "Then don't discard your past." Julian swallowed. "Repair it." The Jaguar's engine ticked in the cooling air, steady and patient, like it agreed, and the moral sat there between them. Simple, stubborn, honest as a wrench. Sometimes the things we think are broken are just waiting for the right hands. Not expensive hands, present hands, hands that stay.